And I'm starting the webinar. Good morning, everybody, as you're coming into the session. We're just going to give people a few minutes to come on in, and we will get started. If you can see and hear us, if you can just drop a message in the chat to let us know that we're coming through okay and there's no challenges. Tell us where you are. The sun's shining here in Norfolk this morning, which is very nice. How's the weather with you, Ben?
I'll have a look. Yeah, we're overcast near Peterborough, but can't complain. Nicer than yesterday, so.
Excellent. And I've got some chat, so obviously people can hear us. It's sunny in Birmingham. It's all good in Rochdale. Thank you, everybody. So thank you for taking the time out to join us this morning. We've given everybody a minute to get in, so we will get underway. We're delighted for you to join us this morning for this webinar on understanding how a process-based approach to work management can transform your accounting practice. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Will Farnell. I'm one of the co-founders and a director at App Advisory Plus. I'm also founder and director of Farnell Clark, and we have been utilizing cloud technology in our practice since about 2009. And I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Ben from Glide. Ben, good morning. Do you want to just give a quick introduction to who you are, first of all?
Yeah, hi, Will. Ben, I'm Customer Success Director at Glide. Previous life was an accountant for about 12 years, so yeah.
Excellent, and we'll come on to Glide and what you guys do in just a moment. But before we do that, we will just give you an overview of what we're going to cover in this session this morning. We've done some brief introductions. Ben's going to give us an introduction to Glide in just a moment. But with these sessions, we try and make them fairly discursive and share insights and best practice that I pick up talking to accounting firms, but equally what Ben is able to do from what he sees from clients that he's working with in the work that Glide are doing with accounting firms. And apologies, my screen's just stopped sharing there. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges of managing process, the importance of process. Why is it important? What are the challenges, and how can technology help you drive better processes in your accounting firm? And Ben's going to talk us through some of the things that Glide do in terms of underpinning good process within firms through the use of their technology. We're going to have some time at the end for Q&A, but if you have a question at any point during the session, pop it into either the Q&A and the chat box for us. Grace is sitting in the background, and we'll keep an eye on those for us. So let's get going. Ben, tell us a bit about Glide. Where did it come from? What do you do? Who do you work with? And let people know what you're all about.
Cool, yeah. So where did Glide come from? So back in 2010, myself and colleagues were working in practice, and really we wanted to tackle that sort of age-old problem accountants had, whereby principally sort of in relation to workflow, we had a lot of tools, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of trackers, but not a feeling of complete control and visibility. We didn't feel as though that sort of challenge of simplifying that for us and managing that for us and making our daily lives easier was being tackled optimally, shall we say. So that's where Glide began. We designed a sort of process-based approach to solving those problems, which is what we're going to sort of look at today. Yeah, fast forward to the current day, we provide a range of sort of practice management tools, process, timesheet, WIP, billing, scheduling, etc., etc. So yeah,
Excellent. And it's one of the things that coming from practice myself, and the big challenge with practice management software particularly is that everyone kind of wants to do things differently, don't they? And how do you build flexibility into that? I know one of the big problems that I see lots of firms have is disparity of data and no single source of the truth. And certainly in my firm in the early days, we had kind of the accounts data in terms of how we build our clients. We had the compliance suite data that was never really up to date, and then we had some CRM type data, and it was like, how do we pull all of that together? And I think we're really fortunate now in terms of the fact that tools like Glide have come along and made it much easier, and integrations now through API gives us huge opportunities to kind of manage that data challenge that I think kind of just almost overwhelms firms lots of the time. But we'll talk about how you tackle some of that stuff as we go through the session. Mm-hmm. So Ben, let's talk about process generally. I'm anybody that's listening that's listened to me talk before has heard me bang on about the importance of process, and almost, whilst I talk a lot about technology, and I wrote a book called The Digital Firm, which is clearly focusing on firms utilizing technology better. One of the things that I see firms doing when they're looking at migrating and digitalizing what they do, there's a really big focus on technology, and there's almost an element of they go out and they sign up for QuickBooks or Xero or whatever, and it's almost like, well, we've done it now. We're kind of using cloud software, so that's it, and our team are using the software okay. But often this technology takes a fundamental change of the underlying business model, and particularly the processes that we follow. You continue that analogy through. Clearly, you're not going to type and data enter stuff manually into a QuickBooks or Xero. You're going to use a Dex or an auto entry or something, and that takes a change in process. And it's a bit that's often neglected. I mean, any initial observations on I'm sure this model is very familiar to you guys. I mean, how much did this play a part in terms of what you were doing when you were building Glide?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, going back to when we were building Glide, of course, the desire there was to focus on the process, and we were, of course, technology was very involved. We're probably back in the sort of pre-cloud era there, and in relation to the people sort of part of the vision we've got here, that's an ever-present that, of course, you've got a lot of challenges with people, but thinking of the process, I think it's really what we have seen is that with the sort of transition into the cloud, it's really sparked the interest amongst firms to sort of actually visualize, think about their processes. How can we see them? How can we improve them? And that's partly, I think, just a sort of a greater awareness of the need really for any business to understand the processes that underpin the service they provide to their customers. I think it's, partly because when you are implementing a new tool, like some of the ones you mentioned there, it's, as you say, it's going to have a massive impact upon what a lot of your resources are spending a lot of their time doing. So it's logical to think about, how we're going to do that. And also, I think a big driving factor in this sector is, of course, the sort of HMRC evolution towards sort of making tax digital. And I think there is a sort of has been for a long time an awareness that things need to be efficient with this more frequent reporting requirements, and I think one of the ways to do that is to look at the process that you've been following. How can we improve it? How can we sort of eliminate some of the less efficient admin burdens upon us, and of course technology is going to play a big part in that, I think.
And I think what we've seen is that we have, as accountants in practice, we have this great opportunity right now to kind of almost fundamentally change what we do and how we do it. And we've got a reason to almost take that blank sheet approach, and the technology that we're adopting and deploying is giving us an opportunity to stop and say, actually, let's use this change as a reason to almost rethink what our firm looks like in terms of what the outcomes are, and working back from outcomes. And I think we're going to talk about it as we go through, but I think too many times we look for software to come in and work with outdated, inefficient processes. And we're going to talk about the difference between process and tasks. And I think that historically we have a series of tasks when we're doing a set of accounts or we're doing a tax return, and we build software systems to help us make sure we complete all the tasks without kind of almost rethinking what we're doing with process. So before we move on to that, the last point that I kind of really want to make on this slide here in terms of process, and again, it's one of the things that I say to accountants quite a lot, is I think it's really important that we as the accountants control the process. We control the end-to-end process of what we do and how we do it and how we work with clients. Clients come to us and want us to help them. And the analogy I often use is you don't go to the doctor and the doctor says, you should take this medicine, and we don't question it and say, well, actually, I think I'd rather take this one if that's okay. And we have to be strong enough to kind of do the same thing. And if we want to run profitable, efficient practices, we have to take control of how we work with clients and what we want clients to do. So therefore, if we want to control the profitability of what we do, we have to control the process that ensures we deliver that profitability in what we do. So there's challenges with all this. We've talked about it, process in terms of getting people to take the time out to stop and think about what their processes look like. We know there's always challenges with people, and technology is not without its pains as well. But if we think about what you do in terms of Glide, if we assume that we understand the processes we're following, how do we make sure that, because the big challenge often is how do we make sure people continue to follow the processes that we've designed? And I guess that's where good technology supports and underpins that, in making sure that it drives the teams to follow the process that we have in place. So what's your approach, Ben, to tackling practice management workflow in a process driven way? And I'm going to just give you the ability to control my screen for a bit here now. So good luck with that.
Okay, I think I have control. It's going to take us on to the next slide. I'll try again. Hearing a bit of a noise. Do you want to drive it for me, Will, just onto the next slide?
I'll do that. But it's now saying it was waiting for you to take control. There we go. There we go. We'll move it on.
Great. Yeah. So in terms of our approach, we call it a process-based approach. And if you're looking for a broad description of the alternative, I tend to call that sort of a task-based approach. And I think it's actually a really, really simple concept to explain. There's nothing especially complicated about it, which I think is actually really important, because for people looking to do this, it has to be on a day-to-day basis, just incredibly simple, behind the scenes, really minimal impact upon, minimal burden upon the day-to-day life of an accountant in practice. So what I've done here on this slide on the right-hand side is I've done a screen grab of a bit of a process. It's not easy to fit a whole one onto a sort of a landscape slide here, but what are the key aspects of a process? Well, you have a little bit above where the screen grab kicks in here. We have sort of job creation, a key moment, and obviously lots of important considerations there. At the very bottom, we would have the endpoint. And, if we take it in the context of providing, let's say, year-end accounts service, we would, when working with firms to understand their processes, it's critical to understand that you start at the start and you end at the end. So typically the start there would be, it's not uncommon to see 2 or 3 months pre-year end this process is starting, which sometimes is, a change in mindset. It really depends on where practice is at the moment, but it's not uncommon to be a little bit more sort of potentially deadline orientated or work-in orientated. And I think this resonates with something you were saying a moment ago, is that we would encourage people to take the driving seat, and always be the one to initiate the process, of course, sort of in this case, pre-year end. Now, then, of course, the actual steps and everything are very firm specific. So I'm not really going to focus too much on what they might or might not be. But crucially, what are the differences? I think on my next slide, well, I've got it on my other screen, so don't worry about jumping between them, Will, but I've kind of got the key differences. Well, the first one is it gives you a precise knowledge of exactly where every job is at any point in time, which, as I sort of said, it sounds incredibly obvious. And I'm sure, when we speak to lots of people, they'll think that's something they have. But just if you follow the line coming down just below the word based there, jobs started, that's a step. So someone's clicked something to make the job run that step. And we've landed on this blue rectangle here in progress. So just to explain the colors going on here, the blue things are my stages in this process. So if I have 500 jobs in progress, they will all be sat on one of these blue things. And just to look over on the left-hand side of the screen where we've got an extract from a sort of dashboard, this is showing us, in this case for VAT returns, here's my stages, here's how many jobs we have at each stage. So really the essence of a process-based approach is that we're providing information with just bulletproof 100% reliability. So let me just expand upon that a bit more. Thinking of our job there that's on the in progress, what we can then see is that we've got 3 steps. So the steps, these gray things, these are our options at each stage. And to explain for a sort of end user perspective, what we're going to see in a typical process-based system is 3 options, and you click one of the options. And this is a subtle point, but it is different. In a task-based scenario, you tend to be either it's not done or it's done, a bit of a sort of binary scenario. Whereas in a process, what we're saying is, and the sort of conversations we have with practices is, right, your job's here, what can happen next? And the exercise is all about thinking of every possibility, not just what do we want to happen next, but what can happen next. So here we've kind of got I suppose, the positive outcome passed for review, but we've also got kind of queries to client, missing info requested. And in a process mindset, we're going to keep track of this job from the moment it's created until it's done, regardless of how it unfolds. Obviously we've got our optimal situation we want to unfold, but it's all about keeping track of this no matter what happens, those difficult clients, missing information, queries, etc., etc.
And Ben, on this, do you generally go when you're working with a firm? Do you go in and help them build these processes, or is there an expectation the firm's got them already, or rather they have them and they just haven't documented them?
Well,
how does that work?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. So, like what we do is we have a number of templates which tend to provide a starting point, or at least a sort of useful for getting people thinking. Now, what we tend to find is that a lot of practices will have thought about this and will have either a sort of Excel-based system, probably listing my blue bits as a sort of tasks, or they might have an existing system that provides a sort of profile or something similar that is essentially trying to do the same thing. And what I always encourage when we're working with them to translate it into a process is that we sit down, at the start, we sit down and look at one process, pick on something maybe like a VAT return, which I consider sort of middle ground complexity, and help them to translate what they've got into what we think is the best way of sort of having a process set up. And it tends to be, that is designed to encourage them to get a greater understanding of the process-based sort of mindset. And the idea of doing one is that then before they go away and think about the other 10, they've sort of learned all of the top tips, as we see on the next slide. But so what you tend to find is those extra dimensions you've got, like having multiple options at each stage, being able to sort of loop around for more complex processes, having sort of different branches, that sort of thing. And it's actually, as I said before, it's remarkably simple. We're not doing anything complicated here, but it tends to be giving practices options and a level of sort of, I suppose, flexibility that is not really there in the existing system. So I absolutely encourage practices to do their own process. We have the templates, but I think you don't just go in and use them as they are. This is all about looking at your processes, and as a sort of side product of that, often people will look to say, are these as sort of exactly how we want them to be for the current technology we're using for our current people? Can we make them any better? So it's definitely an exercise there in sort of mapping out these processes.
And what do you see as the kind of the key benefits or outcomes that firms get when they go through this process of actually taking time to think about their processes, mapping them out? What are the wins that they generally get but in doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I suppose the principal benefit is those sort of insights literally provided by the system. So what I sort of mean by this is almost the transition that I went through in practice, which is whereby when you're using a sort of a spreadsheet or what I call a sort of task orientated system, in my opinion, it's they're great. You can sort of record information in a very similar way to what we're doing here. But I always found it was sort of giving you half of what you wanted. It was sort of giving you, the human, here's a lot of info and you work out what needs to happen next, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So the principal benefit, and particularly true, I suppose, of those with responsibilities for clients, but perhaps not day-to-day involvement, is that at any time they can have the sort of dashboard visuals over on the left-hand side here, which crucially I find with any sort of dashboard or widget, it's not just what does it claim to show. It's actually the fact that the way we progress through this is so controlled that you can rely on it, you can trust it. And that's one of the main benefits of the process approach. One thing I personally take a lot of satisfaction from is when people, will implement the system, and then a couple of months later, almost phone up with a surprised tone of voice that they have deleted their spreadsheet. And it's almost like the expectation has been set that these tools are good, but you can't fully trust them. Have a spreadsheet, and that's destructive across a practice, because it means that information is there, but no one quite fully relies on it. There's always a phone call or a meeting to get the sort of the facts. And that's the main benefit. Just what a process offers is just fully reliable information. Now, as a second benefit to that, which perhaps comes further down the line, I'm not sort of saying do it all on day one, but there's a lot of interest nowadays in automation, some of which we provide, and we'll talk about the sort of email and SMS later. Other tools obviously provide automation in other areas and can connect with systems like Glide.
Yeah.
And really what I've found is that, especially in a practice with a sort of diverse client base, it's really, really hard to fully automate something, because you'll always have some cohort or group of clients that it's a bit different. We can't just send that there. And actually a process-based approach allows you to achieve that. And it's not just about the different types of client. It's also about that trust in the data. As we were saying before, it's not uncommon for the spreadsheet, the task list to inform a user, but they're the one forming the facts. And that means that you can't fire off reminders or emails, because if you don't fully trust it, why would you use it as the basis for an automation? But with a process approach, you absolutely can, and people do achieve that.
Excellent. And I mean, you gave us, you kind of gave us some tips, some top tips for structuring process. I'll put them on screen here. Do you want to just kind of take us through some of these, Ben, in terms of why some of this stuff's important?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just clocking as well, a couple of questions coming in, so thank you. And I think we'll get onto those in a moment. Is that right, Will?
Yep, absolutely. Unless it's relevant for you to take them now, Ben, in which case, go.
Yeah, actually, I will, if that's okay. So just a question here regarding, I usually ask the missing info at the end, and this, thank you for sending that in. So a key thing, I guess, with any system, and certainly with the process-based approach, is that it can be a blank canvas. You design how your business should work to best serve your clients. And then this is just a tool that allows you to track and control and visualize that in a certain way. So I'm always amazed at how different, having worked with several hundred practices, just how different they all are. And so, yeah, to answer that question, absolutely, we're just looking at an example here. And everyone is different, absolutely. Yeah, and then the next question from Mila, we'll answer that one in a second, because it'll tie in with this, I think. But yeah, here's our top tip. So just sort of thinking, what are a handful of things that you kind of need to do well to get the most out of a process approach? Well, I'm actually going to go 2 and then 1. I think I did them in the wrong order. So focus on the big picture milestones of job progression. What I mean by this is that we're trying to take, again, sticking with the year-end idea, we're taking something through, think of a December year-end, we're maybe creating our job in September. Hopefully we're finishing it nice and soon after December, but we're doing maybe reminders for tax payments, etc. So it's going up to, it's maybe spanning a whole year. What we're interested in tracking here is the big picture milestones as that progresses through the office, especially relevant if you have a team scenario, you've got different people interacting with the job. Where I see some people go wrong with this is to get bogged down in the minutiae, the granular sort of technical checklists for the preparation stage. Now, glides and these diagrams we're looking at, they are tracking an assignment through, the sort of big picture milestones, things that I would be familiar with, things like, have we actually amassed the information to begin? Whether that's in a traditional delivering info or a cloud sort of acknowledgement that it's complete scenario. Have we assigned it? Do we know who's doing it? Have we started? And then you've got your reviews. And then you've obviously got client approval and submission. That's sort of where this works well. And we have, Glides, as an example, has other features to help with more sort of checklist stuff. But that's really important. Now, top tip number 1, and we don't need to move back to it, but just thinking of the diagram back on the previous slide. On point 2, I'm kind of encouraging you to think minimalist in terms of stages, I suppose, but on each stage, do the opposite. Anything that could possibly happen, have it as an option. This is really important because essentially it helps the end user. If I'm someone that has just done something in a practice, all I want this to be is I go to that tab, search for a client name, and I want to see a button, and I'm thinking specifically how Glide works here. I want to see a button that is labeled with exactly what's just happened. It's all about making it easy for me, taking the thought process away from me and actually having that in the system. Also, by having every option, it really helps with that, both the accuracy of the data that everyone else is seeing and the automations. So to take those one at a time, in terms of the accuracy of the data, in a sort of going back to the sort of task-based approach, we might have a task that says sort of prepare the accounts. Now, especially as you get into bigger team scenarios, what does that mean? When are we putting a tick or a date in there? Have we perfected them? Have we done a draft? Have they gone out? And this sort of gray areas all limit what you can do with this data set in terms of automation. So as I think I had on my example a moment ago, let's have different buttons, pass for review, queries, missing info, straight to client for approval because they're perfect, all these different things. Those steps can then go to different stages, which then gives a great visual for the sort of manager with the oversight. They know exactly what's going on. And from a sort of automation perspective, those different buttons can do different things. So if I've clicked pass for review, maybe it's going to just ping an email to my manager or to the client's manager. Maybe it's going to set, picking up on Mila's second question here, how can we encourage managers to review jobs quicker? Well, absolutely. If we're clicking to send it for review, we can set a target date, which I'm jumping into my point 5 here, but we can say, look, this has got a 10 working day turnaround, or 1 or 2, whatever is appropriate. And we've put it in a stage. So let's just follow that step through. We've clicked pass through here. It's gone to a stage called a waiting review. The job holder has moved to be the manager, let's say Bill or whoever. He's got a target date. Now, that's different to if we'd have clicked a button that says, actually, this has gone out to the client. We're not doing any of those things. So it's all about extreme precision, meaning that when someone sees a target date, yeah, that's there for a reason. This needs to happen. Just to follow through a bit with answering that question there, how can you then get them to actually do that? Well, I think giving visual dashboards that are absolutely relevant and contain accurate data helps. People actually use them. Really, the target date mechanism, I'm jumping on to point 5 here, but target dates is all about helping people prioritize jobs. Now, in my opinion, the way to do that well is for target dates to be event driven, not on that 3 months before the year end, say, right, the way I want to run my practice is that we'll do this on month 1, we'll do this on month 2, and everything's done on month 3. We can look historically and compare how we're doing to those benchmarks, but actually, this has happened, therefore the next step should happen in 10 working days is a far better way of thinking, because then it's just known that is reasonable. It's sort of accurate. Of course, there'll be reasons why it can't always happen, but that's definitely the best way to do that. Yeah. In terms of making the automation possible, again, in that sort of simple task, have we done the account situation? We're limited to what we can do. So if we've clicked a button saying missing info has been requested and we've parked on a different stage, we could then have automatic alerts chasing that up, and we know they're not going to send for the ones that we've actually done. I think it just brings the necessary level of data to this situation.
Yep. Excellent.
So point 3, I think we've done there. And point 4, it's all about, I suppose, one for the bigger teams and just job positions, responsibilities. Again, really, to summarize that one, it's just about accuracy, having all the data you need, ensuring that if someone's looking at a dashboard and it's saying this is yours, that it actually is.
Brilliant. So 2 more areas for us to just pick up on, Ben, before we wrap up. So we've talked about the importance of process, and again, my view is that we have to tightly control the process. We have to almost educate clients and set the expectation for clients very early on. And one of the big challenges for many firms is onboarding, because where process really comes in is where we have very administrative heavy tasks to do. So onboarding is full of them, and lots of interdependencies and everything else. So you guys have thought quite hard about this and focused on trying to get that very first process right, because it's kind of where everything starts, isn't it? We take on a new client. It's the first thing we kind of have to tackle. So here's your slide. Just talk us through what the thinking is around this really important process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're saying that it's really important, and what I'd observed from my work is that it's the most difficult one. That was kind of why I wanted to allude to it today. When firms are considering their processes, new client onboarding is probably the most complex thing you see. Now, the process-based approach helps with this, but you do have to think carefully, because one thing with a process is that the job is moving through it, and at any one time the user is seeing here are my options to complete this stage. Now, you can't therefore mix in independent processes. And the 4 that I tend to have in my template are AML, payment mandates, professional clearance. They're 3 very specific things that need to happen that have multiple sort of stages. And then in-house is sort of my catch-all. People tend to come to us with a big long list in a spreadsheet where they tick all these things off. But what you have to acknowledge here is that these are, if professional clearance, you've got a great former accountant, it's going to be wrapped up on day 2. You need to better move through that process. You can't be saying, actually, my next line is AML, and the manager's not done that yet. So you've got to split those things up and think of them each as a sort of diagram. Maybe you'll have more or less of those. And then just on the right-hand side here, I also recommend split out anything that might be needed by your existing clients. So activating a certain service and having an onboarding process, let's say for payroll, might interact with a new client coming on, but it might be an upsell to an existing client. So don't sort of merge that in there. True as well of sort of 64.8s, etc. And I think another thing here, just sort of tapping into what we see working well, is, this is your point, your events, your sort of springboard to potentially having some automation around reminding your managers just to touch base with your clients, especially if you're picking up a new client and it's quite a while before you're going to be doing their, let's say, sort of compliance work. Maybe they're interacting with someone doing the daily bookkeeping, etc. But let's have some automation around reminding us to just have a phone call on 2 months, on 3 months, see how it's going. It's so easy to forget those things. They don't link with a sort of statutory deadline or anything like that, but they're really powerful when it comes to making sure clients are settled in, picking up on any sort of teething issues. And yeah, that all sort of comes out the new client one. So there's lots to talk about here, but I'm conscious we've got the other one as well.
Yeah,
so that was that really.
And you teed that up really nicely for me there in terms of talking about client touch points, because there's lots of talk about automation and how we utilize technology to automate some of the things that might get overlooked, and it's very relevant. But how do we identify and how do we decide what things are right for automating without losing that human touch, or how do we make automation humanistic? I'm a big advocate of client experience, and how do we decide what we can just set a trigger and say, right, send an email to this client, and how do we make that humanistic and everything else, or where do we not need to?
No, absolutely. So when we built our sort of email SMS automation, I was really surprised by where I saw it working well. I had thought it would be popular with firms that were looking to sort of move away from the human aspect and just automate as far as possible. In actual fact, where it works well with our clients is if you think of it as a supplementary layer of communication. So, clients are receiving these messages. Of course, the technology will allow you to make it be really personalized, but I think it works best when your templates are clear that, this is an automated reminder, and actually you're still going to be backing that up with the sort of personal service you provide, if that's how you run your business. And what you'll find over time is that the need for those more costly personal interactions is sort of reduced down to the ones that really add value to the relationship. And we're going to get away from just a sort of expensive member of staff phoning up, chasing a bit of information, chasing approval. And it just seems to naturally work well and be well received by clients. I interacting with anyone I do, like my dentist, doctor, whatever, I don't ever sort of look at the automated SMS reminders and think, they don't care. What I value them on is those that we still have those human touch points, and as long as they're good, that's great. And I think, as we were saying at the outset, with sort of the MTD implications, etc., we have to sort of reduce our resource requirement where it's not adding value. Couple of notes I've got on here really. We just thinking of from a glide perspective, we have 2 types of email, SMS automation, you've got event driven. And if you think of yourself moving through a process, that's like, well, we've just clicked this button, so do this. They work great, really, just keeping the client up to date. We have submitted this. Well, thank you. We acknowledge receipt of this. People like avoiding these unnecessary calls. As I say there, point C, supplementary to personal communications. The alerts are, these are, like, I suppose, more useful in the sense that they're conditional. If we've gone through this step and 20 days later we're not yet on this stage, send this message. And with alerts, you're into something's about to not be done or go wrong or has, so really I think it's, whether it's external with your clients or internal with your team, it's entirely reasonable to send that reminder because someone has deviated from what they agreed they would do. So yeah, just a few notes there. Can I very quickly answer Tracy's question?
Yes, yes, go for it.
Tracy, thank you. Tracy just said here, because I don't know if everyone can see this, but stage task approach, that's what we do. It all falls down where people don't fill in various stages. Well, yeah, exactly my experience, Tracy. It's impossible with a process approach. So, it's jobs created, it's on a stage. You have the options to complete that stage. You are not allowed to complete anything else. That would be impossible until you get there. You've sort of tapped into the essence of the process approach there, that, we're trying to eliminate human error, just that lazy partial completion entirely, and it is just impossible. Of course, a member of staff could just not log into the system. We can't really do anything about that, but we do away with all of the sort of partial, lazy, or I'm just going to put data in the finalized, and be done with it. That all goes because you have to move through a process in a controlled fashion. And as I said before, that empowers all of this automation, because if you're automating something, if there's a date here, it's no good if half your team aren't putting that date in, but it can't happen when you're moving through a process.
Yeah, and I think that also underpins the slide that we started the conversation around, in terms of we've got to get this blend right in terms of people, process, technology. You take one part out of it, the whole thing falls down. So in that example, we have the process, we have the technology, but the people have got to do their bit. So it is cultural. It is it's a much bigger challenge, and we've got to foster cultures to enable that kind of stuff to happen, and everybody understand why it has to happen, to give us the desired outcomes. So the last point on the automation stuff here, I think that's really important, is that when we talk about client experience, we're talking about the effectiveness and the frequency of client touch points. And whilst this stuff is automated, it's still a client touch point. It creates a feeling from the client, but it's also a trigger to perhaps encourage them to respond and engage with us. So it's getting the balance right here in terms of the right type of automation. And I'm a big advocate of touching base with clients as often as we can, automated or not. I just want to make sure that we don't rely totally on automation of contact, and we do these things that you mentioned a moment ago, Ben, about onboarding, in terms of setting those alerts to pick the phone up to a client, and so on. Right, we are almost there. I think we've picked up most of the questions. Because I'm sharing my screen, it's a bit more difficult for me to do it. I always like to kind of summarize here some of the key takeaways for everybody that's been listening. So we've got 4 for you here. Number 1, the right blend of technology, people and process is critical. I made the point a moment ago. Ben made the point in terms of the question that was asked. If we remove one of those 3 elements, we have challenges. It's not going to work. We're not going to be efficient. We're not going to be effective. So it's really important we get that blend right. My personal view, I can't say this enough to firms that I talk to. We as the accountants have to control the process. If we don't control the process, we have no way of controlling profitability of what we do. And ultimately, we're in business to do that. Visualizing and mapping your processes is the first step to full control and oversight in a practice. Ben's done a great job here of highlighting why understanding your processes, mapping them out, looking at them are critical. And once you've done that, you have the ability to start controlling what you do. And if you get that control and oversight, that's naturally going to lead to greater profitability, efficiency, and ultimately greater client experience, which is what we all strive to do. We all want to do best by our clients. We want them to refer us. We want them to appreciate what we do for them. And so we're almost there. I just saw a question pop up there, so I'm going to stop sharing my my screen at this point and just have a look and make sure we've picked up at the last Q&A. Yes, we've had a question around slides. We will be circulating the slides by email in the next kind of 24-48 hours. Thank you everybody for taking the time to attend. Thank you, Ben, for your input and putting the stuff together today. I hope it's been useful and informative for everybody. I've certainly enjoyed the discussion. If anybody has any other questions, do drop them in. We will circulate the recording as well as the slides. So somebody just said there was a problem, they had a problem with sound. Hopefully the recording will be fine and you'll be able to watch the recording back. So thank you all for taking the time. Thank you, Ben, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing everybody again on another webinar in a month's time. So thank you to Ben and Glide for joining us. Have a good rest of the day, everybody. And thanks again for joining us. Take care now.